Welcome to Moving Conversations, a podcast for movement professionals by movement professionals. If you coach, train, or teach movement, Pilates, or fitness, then this podcast is for you. With more than 60 years of experience in fitness and Pilates, your hosts, Brian Ritchie and Nora St. John, explore the science of human movement, diving deep into the facts, myths, and common misconceptions, hoping to spark thought and conversation about how we view fitness and movement. Now, let's jump into Moving Conversations. Welcome to Moving Conversations. I'm Brian Ritchie. Joining me as always is the wonderful Nora St. John. How are you doing this morning, Nora?
Very well, thank you. It's sunny and polleny right here. How about back there?
Same thing. We've actually gotten heated up a little bit, which is nice. Today's supposed to be in the mid-80s. Everyone here starts complaining as soon as it heats up. Being from Hawaii, I love the heat. So for me, mid-80s is sort of my magic number. But everyone around here is going, oh, we miss spring. So I'm happy. They're not, but I am.
Awesome.
So today, we're going to be talking a little bit about the lower body. We've talked a lot about the low back. So we want to focus a little bit on what I've referred to as sort of multi-dimensional or three-dimensional movement of the lower body and how we really want to achieve that lower body conditioning in general. We also wanted to hit a couple of, if anybody's taken any of my courses, the Integrated Movement Series, I do some things called myth busting. And we came up with two myths that are very interesting that I think would be fun to sort of poke a stick at and see if we can deflate that balloon a little bit and maybe dive in a little deeper into those. So we'll get into those later. That's a little teaser. We're going to get into those. But first, let's start with lower body conditioning, just in general. Coming from the Pilates world, how do you sort of look at lower body conditioning in general?
From a Pilates lens, there's a couple things, and this is why I wanted to have this conversation. From a Pilates lens, lower body training is, we do a lot of work on foundation training, on alignment training, on improving biomechanics of the hip, the knee, the ankle, in a relatively lower load, not necessarily fully weight-bearing environment. So a lot of what we do in Pilates is corrective work on trying to improve biomechanics and joint function, et cetera. One of the challenges, however, and this is why I wanted to have this conversation from a Pilates perspective, is a lot of Pilates exercises for the lower body on the apparatus are primarily in the sagittal plane. Mm-hmm. There's footwork, there's all the knee stretch series, there's all the work on the chair, and there's a few times when we will go out of the sagittal plane and do something in rotation or with, hips and other positions. But in thinking about functional movement, it's really important to go beyond sagittal.
Yes.
And that was why I really wanted to just talk about that and keep people reminded of how to go beyond sagittal.
If you think of fitness in general, I'm just thinking of lower body. Squat is going to be primarily sagittal. If you think of, traditional, going to the gym exercises, leg extension, leg curl, leg press, all of these things are very sagittal plane. Lunges, very sagittal plane. When I take my sons to the gym and work out, I can't help it. I start watching people. And I notice they're primarily just sagittal. And we get looked at because I have my sons who are 12 and 15 doing side lunges, doing rotation, doing all of these things, and people start looking at us because, of course, these are younger folks doing it, but I'm thinking this is the time to really set that foundation of moving in so many different ranges of motion. And as a kids, they do move in so many different ranges of motion. They don't just walk in a sagittal plane like we don't, but especially, running, twisting, pivoting, turning, all of that sort of thing, and they should be training their body for that.
Yeah, when you think about, again, this is functional, right? This is where this functional idea comes in. If you watch anybody, even somebody who's just walking around their house, just walking around the house, you go around a corner. You don't do that by staying sagittal and then sagittal and then sagittal. You pivot and then you turn, you pivot and then you turn. So even in everyday life, we are using our hips in a multidimensional, multidirectional fashion. If you're talking about anybody who's doing any kind of sports activity, whether it's, running, dance, soccer, etc., you are always doing multiplanar work. You make a right turn, you make a left turn. All those involve both stability, strength, and mobility in all of the aspects of the hip. and the ability of the knee to tolerate whatever those different vectors are for safe, performance of whatever that task is you're trying to do.
I had a client just this week. We were doing, step ups. Older woman, needed balance, needed to work on lower body strengthening, knee replacement, hip replacement. So we were doing step ups. Then I had her do a rotating step up where you're facing 90 degrees to the step. And you step up and you do that. Basically, you're doing internal rotation of the hip as you step up and then external as you come back down, and everything's under control. And she said, why am I doing this? I don't understand. And when I explained, I said, think about what you do just to get in and out of a car, how you turn your hip. How, when you're sitting down, do you turn your butt to the seat and sit perfectly straight, exactly, and then lift your legs and rotate your body? No. We're always doing some internal, external rotation of the hip. We're always working our body in multi-directions and dimensions. And that's something that people don't really think about when they want to do functional training. And I almost hate that word. Because in fitness for so many years, functional training meant, standing on a BOSU with a ball on your head and while balancing this and juggling that. And that's not functional versus a squat, a step up. But then taking that to that next level, like you were just saying, into various degrees of 3 dimensions.
That's a really good example, because the other thing that I would bring up there is, this gets maybe a little subtle, but how we think about movement affects how we do movement, like very straightforwardly. And if you really just think like movement is always sagittal, or you only do, let's say, squats this way, and then you do stepping sideways, you're still not getting all the possible variations of where your feet might end up having to go if you're, trying to avoid something on the floor, you've got a crazy little dog that runs under your feet or whatever it is. And so one of the things I like to think about is, yes, you want to get sagittal, yes, you want to get to the sides, but what about all those in between points, right? And what about going to the back at a funny angle? sometimes somebody comes up to you, have to step back at an odd angle. And really, I think fitness should be preparing people for anything that's going to come at them in life.
Yep.
And that's part of it, is really creating that ability of the hips to respond with strength, with grace, with ease to any challenge that comes up into the body.
So in something like this, I'd even want to sort of question, there are many people out there and I find this with beginning instructors, that they believe that there's only 2 things, the right way to do an exercise and a wrong way.
Yeah.
It's black and white, it's ones and zeros, it's binary.
Yes.
And their right way of doing it is so narrow. It has to be so narrow. Whereas if I was going to tell someone to pick something up off the floor, I'm much, at this stage of the game, I've got 30 years in, I don't over cue, because like you said, they're not going to be constantly thinking about walking up, straddling it, squatting perfectly down, reaching with their hands, keeping their back straight. No, it's a lightweight. How do you pick that up? I may coach them a little bit to make sure they're not going to do something silly, but do I overcorrect if it's not bothering them, if they're doing it properly, if they're doing it 80%, 90% of what we would consider correct? It's much more functional for life, because how many of us have to reach into the trunk and we're not exactly square with the trunk? We're sort of leaning over a little bit, or, kneeling or getting up off the floor, all those positions.
You got real life, right? Real life doesn't happen with that. And the other thing too is, the reality is very, 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 I would say nobody, but I'm going to say very few people have the consciousness to be aware of every move they do. Yeah. Now, if somebody's in extreme pain or even mild or moderate pain, they may be more conscious of what they need to do. Like, I can't bend my knees too far. I can't, whatever it is. That's a situation where awareness is there, because if you do X, Y, Z, something might hurt. But life doesn't come at you that way. And you really do want those positive habits to be as unconscious as possible. You want them to automatically do something pretty good, pretty good biomechanically in terms of lifting that up off the floor, or, running really fast for the bus. You want them to do something decent, like something good enough.
Yep.
But good enough, but automatic.
Yep.
Right. Because
Absolutely.
oftentimes you have to respond to something quickly, and you can't respond quickly when you're that hyper controlling about what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why I try and remind my staff and other trainers, ease up a little bit. There's a gray
Yeah,
area when we're talking about
yeah,
cueing, and we'll cover cueing, on down the road because we can do a 2-hour special on just that. But there's a lot of gray. It's not black and white. There's a lot of in between. And when we're talking about function, that's really what we're talking about. That's really what we're talking about.
yeah.
So we have to sort of remind ourselves of that, and just figure out what's going to be good enough. Like you said, what's good enough?
Yeah. So thinking about that, because one of the things that, again, from a Pilates perspective, which is one of the more detail-oriented physical training methods, I think I can accurately say that. It's looking at things like, okay, so yes, you can line somebody up very well when they're bilaterally symmetrical and they're working down the midline. You're looking at that. But what if you are trying to get some different angles going in their hips?
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, taking a single leg knee stretch. So you're standing beside the reformer and you're pushing, one foot on the shoulder rest and one foot on the floor, and you're pushing that shoulder rest back,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you're basically doing like a hip extension exercise. Okay, well, what if you slightly angle away from the reformer? So you're at a weird angle in that hip. And so there's a lot of times I find when I'm working in odd angles
Mm-hmm.
that I can't get perfection. Right? It's just the machinery doesn't work. It just doesn't really quite make sense. So then how do I find good form within those circumstances?
I can see that. I can see that because I was literally just doing that exercise earlier today, getting my glutes firing, all of that kind of stuff this morning. And it's true it's very sagittally based. It's really,
Yeah.
forward and back. So we really want it. In doing it, I'm thinking, oh yeah, if I would have angled a little bit this way or a little bit that way, how could I affect that? But that makes a lot of sense.
And I think something to think about in terms of, even just doing lunges, right? I always like to do what I call clock lunges. And then you do a variation too, where, you step forward, you step at 2:00, you step at 3:00, you step at 4:00, right? You kind of go around like that way. And the strategies people use even to do that
Mm-hmm.
is really interesting because some people, really keep their foot going more or less in the line they're going to, at least for that first part of that quadrant. Then what do they do with their foot to the back? Is the foot parallel? Is it turned out? Is it turned in? So there's so many options in terms of that. And I love to play with, okay, let's just take a simple, clock lunge and play with the foot staying parallel through as much of that as you can. Now let's play with the foot staying turned out for as much of that as is comfortable. It's going to change a lot in each of those positions. And then maybe a little bit turned in even in all those
Mm-hmm.
positions. So just playing again with trying to create stability and strength and prepare the hip to be in any of those positions it might end up in.
I do this in the squat position a lot
Yeah.
because I will have them be, whatever's comfortable, relatively parallel or slightly turned out. But then I might say, okay, take one foot a little further out. Take one foot a little bit more narrow. Do this, do that. How does it feel? And I won't have them go low. I won't have them,
Yeah.
do anything too drastic, but enough just so that they feel what it's like to go down a little further. And
Yeah.
the other exercise that I love, clock lunges, where you are going to
Yeah.
12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock,
Yeah.
all the way around because it is so good. And again, you can either pivot the back foot, the stationary foot for lack of a better word, or you can have it stay planted and staying straight forward because all of these things are going to affect, how it works,
Yep.
you know?
Yeah. And those are fun ways to do that. The other thing that I often think about with the low body, just to bring it up, is training the upper body and training the lower body are two very different things for me in my mind, because the lower body is in constant, more or less constant use. Like if we're walking, it needs endurance, it needs strength, it needs just plain old everyday functionality. For the 9 million times we're going to bend our knees and flex our hips, in our lifetime. That number, by the way, is completely made up, so don't take that as a quote. Right? So it's like there's also just that piece, is that you really do have to work on plain old endurance and strength.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. No, if you were going to focus on, trying to get someone to do three-dimensional training in their practice, for instance, especially with Pilates, because I hate to say it, there's a lot of people who are just reformer based, or they're very limited by what repertoire they've used in the past,
Right.
and that's really what their focus is whatever that repertoire is, or the choreography that they're used to. How would you begin to change that? What would you do to affect that again on the reformer, which, like we said, is quite sagittally based?
Mm-hmm. Well, from a Pilates perspective, there's a bunch of things that I've played with. One is just, even with basic footwork, playing with different foot positions. So heels, turned in, turned out, wide, narrow, 1 foot in, 1 foot out. We're playing with all kinds of different angles of the hip there. And I do that specifically, the 1 foot in, 1 foot out, looking at hip stability. So maintaining the pelvic stability while the legs are, one's internally rotated, one's externally rotated. And one of the things about that is number one, it's just working on that dissociation of the hip and the pelvis, because sometimes you want to do that. I also use that as a corrective when somebody really has a rotational pattern in the pelvis, which leads to one leg being chronically a bit externally rotated, one being chronically a bit internally rotated. So just playing with that, very simple, doing it both double leg, single leg, using the jump board or the standing platform, right? Because that's another place, because working closed chain, fully closed chain, as opposed to just on the heels or the toes, can also be really helpful on that.
I was just going to ask whether or not you were doing those, different foot positions on just the bar, because when you're on the bar, I've got very big feet. I've got 13 4Es. So for me, if just my heels are on, it feels a little more awkward. Whereas when I have a little bit more contact, it just feels a little better. So the jump board actually just feels a little bit better in that sense. And I didn't know if you preferred one versus the other.
The only challenge with the jump board or the padded foot plate is that for people like you, who either two things: one, who have a big foot, or else are particularly lordotic. If the jump board isn't high enough, when they put their feet up on it, they may end up in a bit more of a lordosis if they've got tight hip flexors. If they're very, very tight calves, they're going to have a little bit of a hard time getting very deep in their plie, at least if they keep the heels on. So there's just some challenges there. Like, I almost wish that the board could be higher for some people, so that you can get a little more range in terms of the Achilles and in terms of just how the ankles work there. But I like it for, the surface we're walking on is not a bar. It's not a railroad track, right? It's a solid surface for the most part. So I think training that way also gives you a more accurate proprioception, more accurate feedback, and more accurate view of what their strategies are as they use their feet than you will get on the bar.
Yeah. You also said something a minute ago, and I want to dive into this a little bit. Open chain versus closed chain.
Yep.
Because there are tons of exercises that I do for post-rehabilitation that are open chain. I have my 7-way hip series that we can do side lying. There's, quadruped. There's all sorts of ways that we can load the hip, either with, put leg weights on them or whatever we want to do. And oftentimes you don't even need that. The weight of the leg is sufficient enough. But being in that purely open chain position really doesn't transfer necessarily. It's a great way to get them back. It's a great way to wake up the muscles. It's a great way to get those things firing again and really activate the muscles, and sometimes put them through ranges of motion that they may not be that familiar with or comfortable with. But then we do have to transfer them to a standing position, a functional position. So what's your view on open chain versus closed chain for three-dimensional movement?
Uh, I think much like you, I use it a lot. I use open chain work a lot when I'm beginning a post rehab process, right? Because it's easier, it's less stressful. I can limit the weights, whatever. But one of the things that an insight late in coming, I have to admit, was side lying leg work, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Pilates, it's just like Jane Fonda in 1972, right?
Yep.
Lying on the side, lifting your leg. Was always talked about as an abductor exercise for that top leg, right? Getting the glute med and getting the whole side of the hip going. And having done that a billion years for, in a lot of classes, a lot of people, I was really realizing that didn't translate like at all to standing stability.
Right.
Like I would hope that would translate to being able to stand and do like a one leg balance without that abductor necessarily getting terribly fatigued, right? Just basically standing on that leg. I did not find that was really as true as I would hope it would be.
Me too.
And this is one of the main areas where I found that the open chain, specifically for the abductors there, did not translate into closed chain strength or endurance. And that was just interesting to me. So, I would rather do for that somebody standing on one leg and just lifting that leg out to the side, whether they're using a bar or a chair or not, just lift that leg out to the side, because then they're getting the stability and the balance on that standing leg, which is really what's going to be fatiguing.
Mm-hmm.
And they're getting the mobility and some strength on the other leg. And then playing with every different angle. You can go forward, you can go back, you can go side, you can do it turned out, you can do it parallel, lots of ways to do that. But I really find that closed chain, especially if you're trying to get strength and endurance, is critical. You have to work closed chain.
It's interesting you say that. The client that I had an hour ago, working with her knees, working with her physical therapist, we've been doing the side lying stuff for a long time, and she's getting much stronger at it, much stronger. And as she's doing it, I mean, she's rocking it. I was combining the side lying leg raise with the clamshell, basically to activate the glute med, getting the hip to be working in slightly different ways, moving her leg around a little bit, but then getting her into a standing position and having her do side kicks. She was demonstrating to me how one side works really well, and the other side, she said, I just can't seem to lift this leg as high. And I said, it's not the leg you're lifting, it's your standing leg.
Yep.
It's always the standing leg. And she said, you're right, that's my weaker side. I thought, again, we have a tendency in fitness a lot of times to focus on what's moving.
Yeah. Well, Pilates too.
Yeah. Whereas it's not always the leg that's moving, it's the standing leg that you're really focusing on, that you're really trying to get to fire. In a step up at the top of the position, are you able to stand there with good balance and get that glute to fire and maintain that stability in that position? Standing on one leg, doing a side kick or a forward kick or anything, it's challenging to that standing leg.
And that's where the work is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the work should be, because that's where you need the stability.
Yep.
Right? Is in the stability of that standing leg, or that leg that you're walking through, that you're moving through, but it's your supporting leg as you go into a different direction.
Yep.
And that's where all that is critical. Step ups, clock lunges, all those things that just help to get that area more organized.
I often find, and I don't know if it translates over to Pilates land as much, but in fitness land, people are always talking about wanting to load. They want to, if they're standing on one leg, and doing a side kick, well, I'm going to put a band around my leg, or I'm going to, do this, or I'm going to hook it to a cable. Whereas it's, again, not always necessarily the leg that's moving that you're really focusing on as much as the leg that you're standing and stabilizing on. Because how many times have we seen somebody as they try and do abduction with a loop around their legs, and their leg comes down and slams the ground on one side, but not on the other. And they don't know why that's happening. And they say, well, this leg must be longer. No, it's it's definitely you, but it's not that.
Usually not.
Usually not. So it is that stability and being able to stand on that one leg. And oftentimes, even in a clamshell, we don't need to add a lot of resistance. A lot of times it's just the stabilization that needs to occur first.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I always focus when I'm doing any kind of leg lift, a standing leg lift of whatever kind. I always focus on the standing leg.
Yep.
The other leg, and the other leg really is I think of the other leg as simply providing a challenge to the stability of the standing leg.
Mm-hmm.
Right, that those different vectors are going to slightly fire different parts of that stabilizing system differently. And so I really think of that moving leg not as the focus leg, but as the leg that's challenging all the stability of that standing hip.
Yep. Yep. And for me, a lot of times I might put a loop around their legs, but that's 3 to 4 months away. And I'll explain that to them because putting the loop actually can benefit those muscles of the hip because you can do a clock position where you kick the leg forward to 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And you're getting all those muscles in that sort of abduction, flexion to extension, abduction, and you're working that full half clock. But they have to be able to stabilize and be able to stand tall on the other hip first without leaning over and without shifting the hip. They need to do that first before they can ever try and weight it.
One other thing, while we're talking about, since clock lunge is coming up a lot here, one other thing too that I look at a lot is what's happening with the foot. Not on the standing supporting side, although that's important, but what's happening, how are they meeting the ground with the other leg?
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of times I'll find like they don't know how to, they can step forward on a flat foot. That's easy. But when that foot starts to go behind them, what happens?
Yep.
Right? They're like rolled out to their little toe, their ankles rolling out. They're really wobbly on that back ankle. Like they go to even just a simple back lunge or they're stepping back into a lunge.
Yep.
You'll see that back foot doesn't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
So, we aren't talking about the feet so much, but working on that stability through that whole chain. So they know where that foot's going to land, how it's going to support them, find that position so that can then translate into security and stability all the way up through the system.
Mm-hmm. What I find I do a clock step oftentimes before I'll ever do a clock lunge, where I'll have them just step forward and step back. And the thing that I'd like to cue is feet parallel or wherever their version of parallel is. Their toes may be slightly turned out, but when they're just standing there, step forward and come back. And I may have them do it 2 or 3 times before cueing this. And I'll say, now look down at your foot. And you'll see one foot being turned out, turned in. And at 12 o'clock, it's not always apparent. But when you get to 2 o'clock, when they come back, now they're no longer fully internally rotating to match the other foot. And then 3 o'clock, and when they're stepping backwards, wherever they're going to, getting it to come back to that position of neutral for them can be a challenge.
Yeah.
And a lot of that's proprioception, just knowing where their leg is in space.
Yeah, but that's critical to having really good use of the 3-dimensionality of your legs, of your hips, right?
Yep.
Helping yourself know where that foot has got to go to make sure everything else is going to work. One of the things I've been doing a lot is either using just a small step like a moon box, which is like a 6-inch step, or we have these half arcs, these little mini arcs. So they've got a little bit of instability to them just because they're not a flat surface. And just having somebody step forward and back. Mm-hmm. Just standing on the top on one foot, stepping forward, stepping back. So they're also going down a step and then kind of up a step, right? Going back and forth that way.
Yep.
Same idea. And then stepping side. And then stepping a quarter off of that, like quarter forward, quarter back. Great balance work. Again, great proprioceptive work. And just a really lovely challenge for getting that whole system to organize and coordinate. And I'll also do it both predictively. So we're going to go 1, 2, or 2.5, 2:30, 3, 4:30, or 3:30, 5, etc. We're going to go like in a very ordinary pattern, or else I'll call it out.
Yes.
I'll say, go to 2, go to 5, go to 6, go to 3. Yep. And they have to respond quickly to try to get to that. That would be a progression. But again, another nice way to get the mind, the body coordinating to be able to accommodate whatever that sudden change is in direction.
And what I've done, you can get these from, various retailers, Amazon, wherever, are these colored discs and put them in a clock around the person. Nice. And now I play Twister. So I'll say
Yep.
right foot red, and they have to spot where's the red, and then lunge to it, step to it, whatever their capability
Yeah.
is, and then left foot blue, left foot green, left, and don't just make it very right, left, but really trying to
Yeah.
get them to look, spot, step toward it, come back, and then hit them with the next one, hit them with the next one. So they're challenging their brain, they're challenging how their body responds to real life, because real life isn't predictable, and making sure that they do understand that we want them to come back to that neutral standing position each and every time. And over time, and I do this with my older clients especially because I want to really engage their brain as well. And they
Right.
get good. They get pretty good at it. And it's not just the game they're getting good at, but being able to really figure out, okay, where do I need to go next? Sort of planning out in my mind a little bit where things are, remembering where the colors are, that sort of thing. So it's kind of a brain game, but at the same time, working proprioception, working balance, and it's fully multidirectional.
I love that. I'm gonna start using that. So I'm borrowing that, Brian. Guys, if you're out there, just one of the things I always say is, if you're gonna steal, just steal from the best, right? We always borrow people's stuff all the time. Nobody has well, they tried to have trademarks on movement,
Oh,
but they
please.
haven't really been successful. Yeah. But I love that, because one of the things that, I'm working with I've always worked with a lot of older clients, but one of the key things there is working mental and physical at the same time,
Yeah.
working cognition and balance, working memory and movement, working coordination with the whole being, really. And something you may or may not know, maybe I take tap dance twice a week. And one of the things I love about that is it is that combination. There's balance, because I'm always changing which side I got to have my weight on. And it's also memory, because in tap dance, you kind of sing the thing, like salap to heel, to heel, whatever you're doing. So you have to have the words going in your head at the same time as your body's doing the movement. And, you feel like, oh, my brain gets better doing these kinds of things, combining the brain and the body together. And that does have overlap, right? That does have, not overlap, that does translate into ordinary life.
Yep.
And, really critical for really all your clients, but particularly your older clients, or those who are not as responsive.
Yeah.
Or coordinated.
And a lot of times that's one thing that I try and do with my lower body training, whether it's clock lunges, or I do something with the Viper. If people aren't familiar, it's a long tube, it's weighted, it's got handles on it, but I'll have them flip it. I'll put it down on the ground and have them stand sideways to it. And they have to squat, lift it up, lift one end up, and then flip it over, take 2 or 3 steps to the side, put it back down again. Well, instead of just doing 10 in one direction and 10 back, I'll keep calling switch, reverse, reverse. And you can do it sagittal, you can do it frontal, you can do it in various ways. But by doing that, it keeps their brain, they don't know when it's coming. It's that anticipation. And I may have them do 6 or 7, and they're thinking, is he ever going to? And then reverse, reverse, reverse. And then it really, the anticipation, the response, the reaction, it really helps engage the brain so that you're not just doing mindless activity, which, let's face it, a lot of people, when you see them at the gym, they're doing the same thing over and over and over again, and it is mindless.
There have been a lot of studies, and we're getting into neuromotor training really quickly here. There have been a lot of studies that illustrate that paying attention to what you're doing when you're doing it is much more effective than not paying attention to what you're doing when you're doing it. Right? There was a study, a weight loss study, that basically took, a group of people and split them up into 2 groups. They each had relatively the same dietary restrictions. And of course, all these things are variable, but relatively the same dietary restrictions. And they had the same workout plan, a lot of which just consisted of being on a treadmill. But half the group could do whatever they wanted to do on the treadmill. They could watch TV, they could, read, they could look at their iPad, whatever they wanted to do. The other group had to not do any of that, not be distracted while they were on the treadmill. And those who were not distracted on the treadmill had a significantly improved weight loss to those who did not.
Interesting.
Same effort, same, relative cadence and speed and time and all that stuff. But those who were paying attention had a higher response from their body, which actually makes sense.
Yeah.
If you're paying attention, your body will pay attention, right? So anyway, just an interesting sideline there in terms of neuromotor training and how if you do create that conscious connection to what you're doing, you will have improved performance.
Mm-hmm. That's fascinating. Interesting. I hadn't heard that study before. That's fascinating. And now it's just reminding me, what do I do when I do my cardio?
Me too.
Maybe I got to start focusing.
I got my
a little
Kindle
bit.
right there.
Exactly. I got something to read or watch or do something because, I got to kill some 30 minutes of time. Interesting. Very interesting. Well, I want to bring up one of the myths because we've been talking about 3 dimensions here. And you brought this up to me, and I do remember it. It's an old myth about we shouldn't train internal rotation of the hips.
Mm-hmm.
And when you brought it back up to me, I do remember this. I was like, oh, yeah, that was a long time ago. And I haven't heard it much recently, but it's something that I was like, oh, yeah, that was something that was pretty popular. And maybe you could explain what the theory was behind that.
So I haven't heard it much recently either, so it may have fallen out of favor. But in spite of that, I still find that people really shy away from internal rotation anyway, like regardless of whether that myth is part of it or it's just their particular, Pilates has no internal rotation in the regular repertoire, particularly. So my understanding at the time was 2 things. One, there was a thought that arthritis occurred more from overuse than from underuse. And now there's a lot of debate both ways. And I think it can happen from lots of different, well, they really don't know exactly why it all happens, but you just get wear and tear on the joints from either overusing them. Now there's a good bit of evidence that says you can also get wear and tear or at least osteophyte growth and things on the joints from underusing them, understimulating certain areas of motion. One of the more common areas for hip arthritis is in the inside part of that acetabulum, which is where internal rotation would influence that inside part of the acetabulum, that medial part of the acetabulum. So my understanding was you wanted to avoid internal rotation because you didn't want to exacerbate and create too much wear and tear in that internal rotation. Like that's at least as it was it was explained to me at the time. Now again, arthritis research has come a long way since that. This was probably 20 years ago. And a lot of what they've come up with is actually a lot of challenges that we have in terms of osteophyte growth and, places where the bones get funky is not from overuse, which it can be, and don't get me wrong on that, but also from underuse, from never stimulating that part of the joint.
Yep.
And so that was like, okay, well, that means that internal rotation is an important area to at least address, at least occasionally. The other thing too is when you guys, if you're standing out there, stand up for a moment and face one direction. And let's say stand up and you're gonna stand facing forward and you're gonna turn to your left, keeping your left foot on the mat, on the floor, right? What happens? You have to internally rotate your left foot in order to make that, right? Just to go around a corner or to go around, the corner in your house or whatever. So internal rotation is necessary for function. If you're training anybody like a golfer, for example, right, major internal rotation needed there. If I'm training somebody even like a horseback rider, it's not strong internal rotation, but there's a bit of internal rotation. It's used to grip the horse. Cyclists, especially serious cyclists, right, really want to pull those femurs in. Slight medial rotation, which helps to activate that whole midline of the body, get their VMOs a little bit stronger, their vastus medialis, medial quadricep a little stronger. So there's a lot of reasons for working on getting that medial rotation going.
Yeah, it's interesting. As you know, I've been studying a lot about the golf swing and how important internal rotation is to the golf swing on both legs. Most people, when they look at it, they think it's only the forward leg, the leg toward the target. Because the leg toward the target is the one that if you're not internally rotating, you can't do a full swing. And that makes sense. However, when I'm taking a backswing, and I'm right-handed, as I go back, I'm internally rotating that right leg quite a bit. And if I don't, what happens is I sling my hip out, which means as I come back, I have to sling it back in, which is always going to affect your swing pattern. Basically, I'm going to be swinging
and the amount of pattern going
out
to the ball.
Exactly.
And how the force goes to the ball. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, it's just the way it is. It's amazing to sort of watch that and to see someone who does it well, how much internal rotation they really have. And that, I have a theory. When you learn something when you're young, okay, chances are you're going to be fairly good at it for most of your life. I can still swing a baseball bat, throw a baseball. I spent years playing baseball. Okay, on a bike. I spent years and years, that was my primary mode of transportation, on a bike. I can jump on and ride distance without a problem. So for me, those are comfortable things. So someone who learns golf when they're in their preteen, teenage years, when they have good internal rotation, when they have good thoracic rotation, all these things that lead up to something like a golf swing, they keep that longer, as long as they continue to do it off and on throughout their life. When you learn when you're older, I find it's a lot harder. I see 40-year-olds trying to learn a new skill like golf or tennis or something, that they cannot internally rotate those hips to save their life. So they have to sort of, forgive the term, bastardize their stance or their swing in order to just make contact with the ball. And they're really wrecking the other joints because they have such limitation in their hip joint.
Right. And anytime you have a limitation somewhere, especially if you're doing a rotational sport, that rotation will show up somewhere else. You'll over-rotate the spine, or you'll over-rotate the knee or the ankle, or you'll over-rotate the shoulder, right? Something else is going to take up that path, because if that path isn't relatively contiguous, force going from one joint to the next, to the next, to the next in a relatively smooth pattern, and sharing the load equally, then that tension builds up. Right. And then if, that internal rotation is going to be kind of a hard end point, right? They're going to go into that. It's like a hard end point, and they're going to keep hitting that hard end point instead of having a little more fluidity in that end point. Right. Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Something else to think about, and I learned this through baseball, when you're throwing a ball with the rotator cuff in general, one of my professors pointed this out to me. You can always tell when a pitcher's shoulder is done, because there's no buoyancy and spring back after they throw. They throw, it comes across the body, and it almost bounces off their body. It almost bounces back. Well, when they throw it and it suddenly is dead, their rotator cuff is pretty much done, whether it's been injured or it's just fatigued to the point where it's not working as well anymore. It's lost some of its strength and integrity at that moment. You can visually see it. Well, you need that in your hip joint, but if you're hitting a hard end point every single time and ramming up against it, you're not decelerating through that hip anymore. You are now basically running into a brick wall over and over and over again, and the reverberations, like you said, are going to be taken in the knee, the ankle, the lumbar, the thoracic, somewhere else up or down the chain. It's going to have an effect. And that's why we need to train internal rotation, not only train it, but work on increasing mobility of that joint. I find almost more than strengthening it, because we need to make sure they have that range of motion.
And with internal rotation, a lot of times I find they don't have mobility almost simply because they have not used it. Where like I don't find it's, with some things it's hard to get more range, like with hamstring length, you've got to really work on it, that kind of thing. But with internal rotation, I often find they just haven't ever used it.
Yes.
Like sometimes I've got to do some actual real work to get it working better. But sometimes it's like, okay, this is an option for your body. Let's play with it. And like, oh, I can do that. And so sometimes it's just helping them understand that they can internally rotate.
Yes, that's true. Yeah. I remember the first time I had a Pilates instructor work with me on footwork. We did parallel. Then we did feet wide turned out. And she had me keep my heels wide and internally rotate my feet and really try and bring my knees together. I got to tell you, that was one of the most uncomfortable things that anybody had ever asked me to do, because I was never, like we said, we train sagittally primarily in fitness, maybe frontal, but rarely do we use that rotation. So I was really uncomfortable, and I felt like my knees were trying to take the brunt of it. My ankles were trying to take, I was trying to use everything except my hip internal rotators. And let's be honest, there aren't a whole lot of muscles that do hip internal rotation. It's not one of these big, massive ranges of motion that these huge muscles are doing. It's very small muscles are performing this. and not many of them.
No, and it's a secondary action with a lot of them too, right? It's just, oh, and they do internal rotation. Oh, and they
Exactly.
do, right? It's not like I'm an internal rotator. That's my job.
One of the best
Yeah.
exercises I found for teaching this, is doing a squat, a normal squat. And I usually take it to almost a 90-degree squat. So, one foot is facing 12 o'clock, the other's 3 o'clock. And then as I stand up, I'm going to take the one that's at 3 o'clock and step in front of my body so that now it's facing like 11 o'clock.
Yeah.
And then go back to 3 o'clock and then take, as I'm standing up, it allows the leg that's facing 12 o'clock to really internally rotate as I'm stepping across the body. And it's gentle. You don't have to go very far to start with, and you can ramp it up. And I find a lot of my clients, after 10 or 15 repetitions, they're going a little further, millimeters at a time, but by the 15th repetition, they've moved a couple of extra inches. And within the joint, it's probably, maybe another 5, 7, 10 degrees of rotation, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I do. One of the things that I look at a lot, if feet in straps is a great place to do internal rotation. But also what I like, what you're saying, just because it's a nice place to do that. But, and this is what I like about what you're doing, is oftentimes with internal rotation, I also want to do crossing the midline. Right, like you're doing with that squat, just crossing over the midline.
Yep.
Because that's another area where, especially as people age, they get very insecure about crossing that midline.
Yes.
Stepping one foot over the other. It makes them nervous. They often kind of get jumbled up in terms of their feet and can end up feeling tripping and being discoordinated. So and again, feet in straps, you can't really get crossing over the body. But what I will do also for this, two things. One is on the reformer, standing beside the reformer, whether it's a low one or a 14-inch one, and basically standing with one foot between the headrest and the risers. So that open space in the back of the reformer, the well, if you will. Standing there, one foot about in the middle of that, the other foot hooked around the shoulder rest. And I use a light spring. Oftentimes I have to do this on a yellow. So if your reformers don't have a yellow, you're going to be out of luck on a lot of this. And then pulling that all the way across the midline.
Oh.
So it's balance, and it's right with this kind of gets a little bit, this is another part of your 7-part hip, right?
Yeah.
Way. Because you get a lot of work on the stability of the standing leg.
Big time.
Because it's having to deal with this force coming at a kind of a funny angle. The foot that's on the shoulder rest, you can keep parallel and pull across, which is going to feel like internal rotation by the time you're done. You can also angle your foot slightly to be more internally rotated to come across or externally rotated to come across.
Interesting. I like that. I'll be honest, that's sort of no man's land when it comes to using my reformer. I don't step in the well. I'm thinking, why not?
Well, you're outside the well. You're not stepping in it. You're outside
the well, but
you're standing on the outside of the frame.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But just standing on that side of the reformer is not, it's not as intuitive because it's not what's taught in the traditional, repertoire and choreography. Interesting. I like that. I like that a lot.
And then version 2, I'll take, so let's say I'm standing on the right side of the reformer. Well, what is it? Let's see. The risers are on my left, the foot bar's on my right. There we go. My left foot would be the standing foot. Now I can also move my right foot parallel with the shoulder rest, put my foot in front of the shoulder rest and push it out into abduction. I can do the same thing from there. And again, playing with different angles, I can slightly angle that standing foot into a little more external rotation or a little more medial rotation, which is going to change the vectors coming through all aspects of the hip.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, because crossing the midline is very important. It is something that we need to do. And I mean, let's face it, go back to Jane Fonda days, lying on your side, you take your top leg, you bring it in front of the bottom one and you lift your leg in the air. But realistically, that is not functional whatsoever. One of the things I do with clients, and I find this hysterical to watch, okay, just because they try so hard. One thing that I love to do is trying to get them to skip, because that is a skill that people forget how to do. And it's like their brain, you can just see their brain go, huh? You want me to what? Yet you tell a kid and they go, oh, this, ba-dum, 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 ba-dum. But the grapevine,
Yes, exactly.
Doing the grapevine, you look at baseball players when they warm up, they do it in the outfield and they go all the way across the field back and forth. They do, and if you watch them, they're not just putting the foot in front of the other one. They are truly internally rotating to turn that hip as it crosses
Yeah,
over and then
yeah.
stepping out. And as it goes back, they're externally rotating it. So they're going internal, external, internal, external. It's wonderful exercise. I've got a hallway here and I'll have clients do it. And it's very uncomfortable at the beginning. But once they get into it, I get them to start turning their shoulders and turning their hips, and it becomes fun. It becomes
That's awesome.
fun. Another
No, that's
one,
awesome.
another one. A buddy of mine was a strength and conditioning coach for a number of professional baseball teams, including the Cubs and Phoenix and a few others. And he would have his players, and he would say he calls it the sexy walk. I said, "What do you mean the sexy walk?" He says, "You ever watch a model? They don't step normally. They put one foot and literally cross in front of the other foot and then cross in front of the other foot. So literally their hips are slinging out." He said, "I don't mind that. I'm looking to see, can they cross the midline?" And he'll have them do it around the gym. And he says, "Okay, sexy walk time, go." And these guys will have to do this all around the gym. And I found that amusing, but it's a great exercise that you can get clients to do it. It's like, wow, it's not that hard, but it does teach that range of motion that we're uncomfortable with.
Yeah, it gets a hip moving internally, and whether it's internal rotation and or crossing the midline, both of those are really valuable skills that get lost.
Yeah.
They get lost in fitness world, get lost in Pilates, and get lost in functional land for a lot of people. They just never go there.
And talking about function, I want to hit you with a myth that has been around since I first started in this industry 30 years ago. And I have a way that I explain it to clients. And I'm curious how you're going to explain it. I think we're going to probably explain this very similarly. But in a squat or a lunge, or anytime you're bending your knees should never, ever, 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 ever go over your toes. Never have them go in front of your toes. So I know what I think about that. I'm curious I'm going to ask you what your thought is before I say mine.
So I've got a few things, but I'll go in one direction. You may go in another. Two things. One, I was trained as a ballet dancer, as a dancer. And as a dancer, you are always getting your knees in front of your toes. If I didn't get my knees in front of my toes, for a lot of different moves, I could not achieve the choreography I was supposed to achieve. So that was clearly not an option in terms of safety in the skill I was trying to train in. So that's one thing. Then the other thing was I was looking through randomly sports photography, right? People caught in mid-action on the field, on the tennis court, in all kinds of different circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
And man, to look at the alignment of the hip and the knee and the ankle caught in motion.
Yep.
Oh my Lord, the ankle's here, the knee is external to it, right, is lateral to it, and it's way beyond it. The hip is going in the other direction. Like that's real life. Real life involves the knee being able to accommodate all kinds of different angles, hopefully without causing any trouble.
Yep. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more in that, because you watch any type of sporting activity and you're going to see that. When we talk about the athletic stance, our athletic stance is basically we're on the balls of our feet. We're on our toes because you're ready. As a baseball player, we are always taught you don't want to have your heels on the ground because you're going to be slow. You want to have your weight in your toes. And as soon as I do that, my knees go slightly in front of my toes every single time. That's normal. So any type of athletic activity, if you're in the athletic ready position, whether it be tennis, pickleball, volleyball, baseball, whatever it is, you need to have your toes or your weight on your toes and not in your heels.
Yeah.
So just from that aspect, you can see, oh, wow, that's a big deal. Where I've always come from, and I've tried to explain this to people before, is I say, okay, who invented these rules? Oftentimes, okay?
Yes.
Who invented them? Because I'm not going to say that they're wrong. in this regard, a lot of these come from bodybuilders or
Oh.
powerlifters. So if you
Hmm.
think about you or me, just with our own body weight, going to get down, sit down in a chair, going to sit down on the floor or something. When we get up, our knees are going to go in front of our toes every single time we try and get up. That's just the way it is. Okay? Watch your kids move. Their knees go in front of their toes all the time. However, would I want to do the exact same thing with 500 pounds on my back?
Yeah, no.
No. And I think that's where a lot of these rules came from, thinking about more the bodybuilder back the Joe Weider days, where, these were written by people who are lifting a lot of weight. And if you were lifting a lot of weight with your knees going out in front of your toes and your heels coming off the ground, you were going to damage your knees. You were going to get hurt. But for body weight exercises, not necessarily.
It also comes so from the opposite side of that, because I grew up at St. Francis Hospital, basically in a medical environment. It also comes from studies that show how much more force goes through the knee when you put the knee in front of the toe.
Yes.
So there's a safety issue too, in terms of the load on the knee increases quite substantially as soon as that knee goes in front of the toe. So for safety for the knees, and I know, with aerobics and those days, a lot of that work came from keeping the knees safe.
Yep.
Right. So there was also that. So there's the body lifter side, or the body weight, body power lifter side, and there's also the safety physical therapy side that come together to really make this rule.
Yep.
And yeah, there's the ready stance. There's also just ordinary life. It's going to happen. So if I'm working with a client with real knee issues, I will pay attention to that particular
100%.
rule. And I'll be cautious, and I will keep that knee back, and I won't go into very deep squat, and I'll keep the heels down, and things will be very, very mild, because that does decrease the load on the knee. If there's arthritis, or there's chondromalacia patella, or there's patellofemoral dysfunction, or other issues, that may exacerbate it. However, if I'm training a person with a relatively normal, healthy knee, or I'm training a client who had knee injury who's trying to get back to a very active sport or activity, then I've got to start training them to be able to tolerate those forces going beyond the foot, right? And not in a 500 pounds on my back way, and maybe even then pull up the reformer as a great example, in a less than body weight way, right? A decrease of body weight, and then build it up till they can take body weight, and then build it up past that if they need that load work.
Yeah, if you just think of the physics of the knee, okay, when the heel comes off the ground and it basically increases the amount of shear force that's occurring between the femur and the tibia. And it's really taking that femur and driving it forward into the patella. So the front of the patella is being held in place by the patella tendon, right? And here's this femur now being rammed into it and basically collapsing the patellofemoral joint. Whereas if your heel's on the ground, you're going to get much more of that posterior chain. The hamstrings are going to pull back on that tibia a little bit. It's going to allow a little bit better movement within the knee joint. You're going to get your glutes, your hamstrings engaged. You get a co-contraction, which makes it much better for overall strength building and taking pressure off the knee. So it's always good to train in a safe environment. And I will tell clients to do that. But at the same time, if I'm having them walk up and down stairs, they're going to be on their toe, and they're going to have the knee go out in front of it. And if they're doing a walking lunge with me or something, and you can see they're paranoid and sitting back into that back leg, which actually causes, the same pain in the back leg that it would in the front if you were compressing that joint. You have to remind them that, hey, look, this is normal life. It's okay. You're not holding on to a ton of weight. If that knee goes out in front of that toe a little bit, it's okay. I'm not a fan of a lot of things that are going out on the internet and, social media and things showing people doing squats on their toes and, oh, you need to train this. And again, if I'm 20 years old, I'm an athlete, maybe. But if I have any knee issues and I'm over 40 years of age, and chances are I've used my knees quite a bit in life and probably have a little wear and tear, it's the last thing I want to do is do something that's going to be, loading that knee joint, that patellofemoral joint, and collapsing it and basically, pinching it off. That's the last thing I want to do.
Right, which always gets back to what we talk about a lot, which is customization.
Yes.
Right. What is your client? What are their abilities? What are their issues? What are their injuries? Where are they trying to go? What's their goal?
Yep.
Right, because from there, I got to keep pushing this because they want to get back to competitive pickleball.
Yep.
Right, which a lot of our clients are doing these
Yep.
days. Or okay, this person just really wants to be comfortable doing ordinary life, doing some gardening, playing with their kids, driving, walking, etc. Ordinary life activities. Okay, I don't need to push them to that level.
Yep.
I just don't. If I'm working with a 20-year-old footballer, I'm talking European footballer, soccer player, and I know that they really want to improve and kind of compete at a high level, I'm going to push them.
Yep.
If I've got a 45-year-old who's got 3 kids and a full-time job and is, super busy and basically comes in and can do exercise 2 or 3 times a week if I'm lucky,
Yeah.
why would I do that?
Yeah, it's not worth the risk. That's something that
It's not worth the risk.
that I mention to people all the time is for everything that we do with our clients, there's going to be a consequence, positive or negative. We're hoping that everything we do has a positive consequence. We're going to build strength, we're going to build endurance, we're going to build integrity within the joint, all of that sort of thing. But occasionally we may have them do an exercise, and sometimes it may be worth the risk for, like you say, a footballer or a competitive frisbee, player or something of that nature, where they are doing a lot of pivoting, twisting, turning on that knee and loading it from so many different directions. Okay, they need to train that, so it's worth the risk. But again, is it worth the risk for somebody who is older, who may have some knee considerations? Is it really worth it? I'll tell you a story. I watch this. I go to a gym. I don't train only in my facility, but I take my kids to a big gym by my house on the weekends. And there I can be nice and anonymous, and I observe everything. There's a trainer who works with, let's just say, it seems like his specialty is plus-sized women, okay, that he has them doing things that are almost more powerlifting and very dangerous. He does like them to, put something under their heels to squat in order for them to be able to get lower into the squat, and they're really compressing the joint. And these women are probably in their mid to late 30s. And I cringe. I watch what he does with them, and I want to go up and just say, is it worth that risk? Is it worth the risk? And he's always trying to get them to lift heavier and heavier and heavier weights. And I understand the need to increase strength, especially if you're trying to lose weight, you want to increase muscle. I get it. And I don't know their back history. I don't know anything about that. So I'm not going to say anything, and I'm not going to approach him. But I watch, and I'm always sort of amazed at his exercise choices. And I always want to know the why. Why did he choose those that can put someone at much more significant risk when there are 10,000 exercises out there that you can choose from? If something, you can find something that's not going to put them at nearly that much risk, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, it's the risk reward piece.
Yep.
Right. And as an athlete, as a dancer, as a performer of some kind, you're willing to take a lot of risk to get your performance up.
Yep.
When I'm working with somebody who doesn't seem to be interested in that level of risk because they're not trying to perform at that level, right? I'm unlikely to push them to those areas for that exact reason. I want to make sure. My goal is, I'm hoping if I work with somebody like that they are going to be better able to do their life for the rest of their life.
Yes.
Right, that they'll be able to do what they need to do, that their knees will hold up, that their back will hold up, that everything will keep moving forward. And sometimes that's creating like just a maintenance level, a baseline maintenance level that we can keep building on slowly. But that sounds a little extreme to me.
It's all about quality of life. You want to help increase their long-term quality of life. And a lot of people think of quality of life thinking, oh, we're talking about 70-year-olds. No, I'm talking about 35, 40-year-olds who are now experiencing a little bit of back pain. Okay, my job is to get them strong enough that they don't have that back pain every day, that they can do whatever they need to do with their kids. And my 50 and 60-year-olds, that they can do whatever they need with their grandkids, get up and down off the floor with their new grandkids, take the child out of the car seat, increase their quality of life so that they're not narrowing their world so much.
Yes, absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
if that means increasing their quality of life so that they can play pickleball, fantastic. Or so that they can
Yeah.
go back out and play golf, every week, fantastic. It's about increasing that quality. And I always come back
Yeah.
to that.
And I feel like I mean, I don't know, my goal is, as I see it, is doing my best to look into their future.
Yep.
Not that I know what's going to happen or what they're capable of, but like choosing the risk that I feel like is going to serve them the best for the longest period of time.
Yes.
I mean, I'm in my 60s now, and it's like, I want to be able to keep walking comfortably in all the kinds of places that I go and do the things I want to do till I'm like 85 or 90 or 95 or 96, which is when all my relatives have died. Right. And it's like, so to do that, what do I need to do now?
Yep.
With a lot of my clients, because I work with a lot of clients in their 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s, like, okay, how can I keep you moving?
Mm-hmm.
That's my goal. How do I keep you moving?
Something that you told me a long time ago, I remember we were in Seattle and we were talking about your travels and also about, the breakdown of the body and things, and that you guys, I believe, were at the pyramids, someplace where that you had to climb up a huge flight of stairs, and you're with other instructors. And they were looking at it saying, nah, my knees aren't going to like to go up there. And yet you and Al just boop, 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 went all the way to the top. And yet you're with people who train way harder than you guys do. And it's almost as though they're living to train rather than training to live.
Yes, it's actually Lanto Island in Hong Kong, where there's this big Buddha, and there's like 300 steps up to this big Buddha. And we're sitting there, and I've got 3 world-class Pilates teachers who were with us on that trip, and they're all look at the steps, and they're popping Advil, and they're like, getting ready, and Al and I are looking at them like, excuse me, we're just walking 300 steps, like that. That for me is a functional goal that I hope to be able to continue to accomplish until I'm dead, which hopefully is a long time from now.
Yes.
And it's it was just one of those moments of what are you doing? Is your training providing you with the long-term benefit that I hope my training will provide me with?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah. Train for what you want to do long-term.
Train for what you want to do long-term.
Yeah. I think that's what it comes down to a lot of times.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'm going back to the 3-dimensional training of the lower body. We primarily talked about the hip, and I think we'll keep the knee for another day. Let's talk about exercise. One exercise that you would choose for our listeners to, either do for themselves, their bodies, or for their clients, that you think is going to be one of the most functional activities you can do for the hip. Or for 3-dimensional training, I should say.
Okay, so we've talked about it a lot, but I really think about the clock lunge as being something I do all the time. That's not a Pilates exercise. So from a Pilates side, it's feet in straps. Mm-hmm. One of the things that the Pilates environment provides is feet in straps, if it's on the trap table or the tower or the Cadillac, or if it's on the reformer, that is just phenomenally useful. Just that kind of stimulation of the hip joint. Again, approaching the hip joint from many different angles, keeping it lubricated, and also then stressing it lightly in all those different directions. So those are the 2 that I really like, is the clock lunge, again, stepping forward, side, back, side, forward. And also then the feet in straps are my 2 favorites for that.
Great. The clock lunge is always the one that I'm going to come back to because it does hit everything. It hits everything. And one thing that I like to do when I do my clock lunge, and I mentioned it earlier, there's 2 different ways you can do it. One way, which I do less often, is keeping the planted leg always facing straight forward. So as I go forward into 12 o'clock, I'm going to go in a traditional lunge. But by the time I get to 2 o'clock, that back leg is pretty much staying straight. Okay? So it's really going to be an incredible stretch for the adductor group by the time I get to 3 o'clock. And I only have a few people that could even dream of getting to 4 o'clock. But the version that I like best of doing the clock lunge is where you pivot the back foot toward whatever number you're aiming for. So when I get to 1 and 2 o'clock, I'm going to take a step, land heel toe facing 2 o'clock, but that back leg is now going to rotate. I'm going to pivot on that back foot and look like I'm doing a traditional lunge in that direction. But then I have to de-rotate to come back to parallel. So that back leg has to turn back straight, and I have to come back and bring both feet straight ahead. When I go to 3 o'clock, I have to turn a little farther. I go all the way to 6 o'clock. I've had some clients go to 7 o'clock because you can, if you have the flexibility in your hips, really take that wide step and do that internal rotation of that back leg. Because as I'm landing in external rotation on that right side, well, that back leg has to now turn and internally rotate in order to come back and meet me basically in that lunge position. And then they reverse. The back leg has to externally rotate to face me forward again, and the other leg has to come back forward into an internally rotated position to become straight ahead again. And what we'll do is I'll demonstrate this on Instagram so people can, take a look and see. But this is probably my favorite way of doing it because it works internal and external rotation so much. And you can use at least half, if not, greater than half of the clock to get the body to move. So that one is probably my favorite. That one and the step across squat, squatting in a wide stance, going and stepping across the body. I think those two are the easiest ones that you can teach just about anybody.
Nice. Love that. I love that kind of dynamic clock lunge. I got to take a look at that. That sounds really fun.
Yeah, it's just a different way to do it. And I find
I like it.
I find it's a challenge for a lot of people. And again, I start them to 3 o'clock and then eventually go to 4 o'clock. I'll challenge them. And you can see their eyes get very big as they're like, uh-oh, I'm not sure if I could do that. And then once they do it, they're like, oh, I could do that. Then I'm saying, all right, let's go to 5. And I might go, well, you made it to 4:45. Okay, maybe here's where we stop today. Or may say, okay, let's aim for 5:30, and just see where their range of motion goes. And as they get better and more confident and more competent at it, that their body's learning how to do it, they're able to go further and further. So those are sort of the ones that I prefer and like.
Love it. Love it. Awesome.
Excellent.
All right. I look forward to seeing you on Instagram.
Yeah. Any final thoughts before we wrap things up?
I hope this has had you guys out there thinking about how to add in some three-dimensionality to your hip training, whatever you're doing, whether it's on the reformer, whether it's in a personal training situation, whether it's on some other piece of equipment. Just keep that in your mind, the functional components of that. It's just important to keep in mind.
Fantastic. And, as always, you can always reach us at Moving Combos, Instagram, as well as movingcombos@gmail.com. If you have any questions, comments, want to have us focus on something in particular, you can reach us there. But I think we're going to call it a day. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will hopefully talk to you next time.